Knowing two or more languages is an incredible thing. And unless you know two or more languages, you don't really understand just how incredible it is. When I grew up, we only spoke Spanish at home. And that's because nobody in my household spoke English. In fact, I don't even remember when I first learned English. All I know is that I spoke English in the streets, spoke Spanish at home, or to the neighbors in the neighborhood who didn't speak English. Teachers at that time thought, or at least we were told, you should only speak English. The child will be confused with two different languages. You want the child to fit in like everybody else. You don't want people making fun of them for having the broken accent. My family was unable to make that conscious decision because nobody spoke English, so we had what we had. But a number of my friends, their parents did speak English, and their parents made it a point to only speak English at home. They decided that they're in America, they want to make America work, and they want their children to have the best education. How wrong can that be? People now have a very different approach to it. People now believe that having two or more language is an incredible thing for many reasons. There are probably about 70 reasons why you should learn a second language. I'm only going to talk about maybe 10. I can remember going to college and having spoken Spanish, having taken Spanish in high school. I'd never planned on being a Spanish major, but I thought, oh boy, I can take a proficiency test and get credit for 16 hours of Spanish. And at that time, you didn't have to pay for the credit hours that you took the test and were able to opt out of the course. But there was a professor there who I really liked, and she suggested, after I took the test, why don't you take my class? I said, why not? It's literature class. Yeah, I took English literature. When I opened the book, I just thought, oh my God, what did I get myself into? It was medieval Spanish literature. Some of you may say, well, you spoke Spanish. It should be easy for you. What I say to you is, you speak English. Shouldn't every person living in America get an A in English literature? Shouldn't everybody get an A in Shakespeare or theater? The same applies. Being Hispanic, growing up speaking Spanish at home, did not make me a whiz at speaking Spanish. I was able to communicate, but it was only through effort and maintaining it that I decided I'm going to keep the language. Originally, I did not think that it was going to be because of some career opportunity. It was really a matter of pride. I grew up being a proud Hispanic boy. I was proud of the fact that I was Hispanic. Despite some of the racial tension we had, I was happy to be from Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic. I lived in that community. I felt that every Hispanic should speak Spanish. And I would marvel as I'm growing up through high school thinking, my God, you're Puerto Rican. Why can't you speak Spanish? Or why don't you want to? Interestingly, some of the better students in my high school Spanish class were non-Hispanics because they had a passion for it. I guess my Hispanic friends thought it was going to be an easy A. They took it, and interestingly, many of them flunked. I didn't think of it as a career opportunity. I just thought that's what I needed to do because that's who I was. And not just me, but people who would speak other languages. I grew up in a community that had 54 different nationalities. We had, at that time, it was a Serbo-Croatian society, it was a Slovenian home, it was a Hungarian club, and all these different ethnic groups spoke their language, and the kids learned to speak them. Perhaps not as fluently as the parents, but they received the exposure to that. For me, that was just what everyone should do. Growing up, furthering my education, I realized there were more people who were Hispanic, didn't speak Spanish, didn't want to speak Spanish, thought, no, I'm not going to do it. I felt that they wanted to be assimilated. It's not that they were ashamed of that, but that, no, I'm in America, I need to speak English. It wasn't until later in life that I really, really could appreciate the true value of speaking a second language. One of the most rewarding aspects of it is that you're able to connect with others. You're able to communicate with someone in his or her language. That is an incredible gift. Bilinguals, multilinguals, polyglots have the unique opportunity to communicate with a wider range of people in their personal and professional lives. Knowing a language makes you a local no matter where you are. It opens up the world to you, literally and figuratively. You will be influenced by the communities that you visit. You don't just take a language in a vacuum. With learning the language comes the culture. Unless you're going to be in a locked up closet learning Spanish or learning German, you can't escape learning the language without learning the culture. And in learning the culture, you begin to appreciate people who are different than you, different in the sense that they have different ways of doing things. Not better, not worse, well, maybe sometimes, but they're different. You learn to be able to connect at their level. You will be humbled by the kindness of strangers. You will actually build long-lasting friendships. For that reason alone, it's very rewarding to speak more than one language. You do not have to be perfect at speaking the language. Very few of us have the proficiency of United Nations interpreters, people who can go back and forth. People are often embarrassed to speak a second language because they don't speak it well. I have a newsflash for you. It doesn't matter. Picture this. You're speaking in a crowd. You're speaking in a language that it's not your native language. People understand that. They understand that it's not going to be perfect. In fact, you can use that to your advantage. Obviously, my English is better than my Spanish at this point because I've had much more formal education in English. But I still read complicated documents in Spanish. I communicate in Spanish. I conduct negotiations in Spanish. But still, I would have to say my English is better than my Spanish. I've been at talks in Spanish where I will say in the group, there's this word, I don't remember it in Spanish, and people from the crowd say, oh, you mean overhaul, or no, you mean this. You engage them, and people want to then help you because they're appreciative of the fact that you've made an effort to learn their language. 20 plus years ago, I attended a conference in Cuba. It was a family law conference. There were many American lawyers there. Speeches were given by Cuban, Argentine, lawyers from all over the world who dealt with family law issues. This American or this US-based practitioner is going to give a talk on divorces. His first 2 or 3 lines are in Spanish. He says, me da mucho gusto parándome aquí hablando con ustedes sobre este tema. Y eso es todo el español que yo sé. What he said was, it gives me great pleasure to stand here and talk with you, but that's all the Spanish I know. The crowd went ballistic. They were thrilled. Just those 3 lines engaged. They were engaged just with those 3 lines. So you see, it does not need to be perfect. The fact that you make the attempt, people will understand and they will be kind about it. They will try to help you. I didn't realize until later in my career that it could have a significant competitive advantage that sets you apart from those who are monolingual. Originally, my first international client was an airplane corporation. Believe it or not, I was brought in, not as a lawyer, I was brought in to help interpret for the Ecuadorians who were buying several aircraft from a St. Louis manufacturer. As I started discussing some of the terms and translating, inside counsel says, why don't you just negotiate the contract for us? I can tell you, had it not been for my ability to speak Spanish, I would have never have been called. Yes, I said I'll be an interpreter or a translator first, but it really catapulted me into the international world. People who speak multiple languages are in high demand. Every firm I work with in Europe, there's a requirement that they speak English or some other language. I cannot think of one law firm that I've worked with in Europe that does not have associates who do not speak English or who do not have a master's of law degree. Between 2010 and 2015, the number of job postings geared towards bilingual candidates have doubled. Employers are seeking professionals who can communicate seamlessly with new customers and expanding in overseas markets, as well as, serve this huge foreign population that we have here in the United States. It's an audience, it's a consumer group that we have to be able to serve. And one way to do it is to be able to communicate with them in their language. There are more than 60 plus million residents who speak a language other than English at home. You do not need to get on a plane to find some other language. Go to New York City, go to Los Angeles, Korean community, Vietnamese community, go to Miami. All these other places have many people who speak other languages. As an added incentive, many language skills also lead to hiring bonuses, perhaps increased salary. But whatever your career goal is, language is something that could be added and puts you ahead of the crowd. Another language also feeds your brain. There are many cognitive benefits to learning languages. People who speak more than one language can often multitask. They're better at solving problems. They're probably better critical thinking, and also probably enhanced concentration. They also have better listening skills. They can switch from completing tasks to monitor changes in their environment more easily than monolinguals who display signs of greater creativity and flexibility. Being bilingual is such an advantage. I mentioned earlier about the culture. The language truly deepens your culture. I can't tell you about the number of Spanish majors, German majors who traveled abroad to better their language. Language is the best connection to another culture. You may say to me, well, most of the people I deal with speak English, so why do I need to know another language? I will tell you why. It's very important. It's one thing to have a negotiation in English, but it's another thing to be at a dinner table, to be at lunch with these people, and having to have them strain themselves speaking in English. You're not learning anything about them by speaking in English. They are learning a lot about you. But if you can carry on the conversation in Spanish, German, French, whatever that language is, you will get a greater appreciation with them, and you will also be able to understand them. They will in turn feel that they can connect with you even more. So learning another language promotes better tolerance, more tolerance. It supports an appreciation of other cultures in a positive way. Usually when you have dislike for certain ethnic groups, find out how many of those people who dislike the ethnic groups actually know and speak the language. I cannot think of anyone that I have met in my lifetime who has learned the language and has not fallen in love with the culture. They just go hand in hand. That is the beauty of the language. It allows you also to see the world. Traveling as a speaker of the local language can revolutionize a trip abroad. Those of you who are bilingual, you can visit any place you want. You don't need some tour guide necessarily to guide you through the restaurants and the cafes and the museum. You can navigate more easily yourself as a tourist, but you will be able to interact and connect with the local. Picture yourself, you're at a French restaurant, talking to your neighbor, the next table. You're having an unpleasant conversation in French. But can you imagine being in a tour group where there's only one person who speaks English and he's a tour guide and he's got to talk to everybody. He's got to make sure everybody's okay. You don't get a chance to make that connection. In fact, I know a number of people who've actually taken immersion classes where they live in a community in Guatemala for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, just to understand how people live day to day. It gives them just an incredible advantage. It allows you to go to the source. Do you realize that there are 6,000 spoken languages in the world? We sometimes require some translation, but at least speaking one additional language empowers us to access information that would otherwise be off limits. People who are proficient in other languages are able to navigate the internet as genuine global citizens. They can see foreign media and entertainment. I can remember being in a taxi in Ecuador. We were negotiating a contract with the Ecuadorian Air Force on some aircraft. And I asked the Air Force colonels, how's the political situation here? Everything's perfect. I'm in a taxi. I asked the taxi driver, how are things here? The taxi driver in Spanish says to me, oh my God, it's terrible. Don't be surprised if there's a coup. Things are just really bad here. Before the internet, taxi drivers were the best source of information in a foreign country. And because I was able to speak Spanish, especially in Latin America, I was able to engage in conversations with them and get information that was really, really valuable. 2 weeks later, there was an attempted coup, albeit a short coup, but there was an attempted coup. I just laughed because I thought, well, the taxi driver was right. The colonels were wrong. Become a polyglot. A polyglot is a person that speaks 5 or more languages. When you learn one language, you improve your communication skills. You multiply your vocabulary. In your first language, yes, but also in the more additional languages you pick up, the greater your vocabulary is in English. And if you already know one language, a third language is not necessarily as difficult, unless you're old like me. I don't think I can learn anything else. But for those of you who are young, keep going. Learn as many languages as you can. Picking up a third language is not easy, but it's easier in children. One of the criticisms I have about the educational system in the United States is that we do not emphasize languages. When you go to Europe and you find people who speak 2, 3, 4, 5, I've met people who've spoken as much as 7 languages. When you look at the proximity of all the European countries, it's understandable. You have to speak those languages to survive. You have to speak those languages to do business among the countries. When you start languages at an early age, you begin to pick up better language skills. You learn it easier because as a young child, your brain is like a sponge and it absorbs. The other interesting thing about learning a language at a young age, at a very young age, is that you can speak like a local. Well, I remember one of my judo students, his son was going through an immersion school in St. Louis. He only spoke Spanish. As I talked to this little boy and I closed my eyes, he speaks with the lisp of a Spaniard. Those of you who may not know, Spaniards speak with a lisp, La Plaza de Azorín. It's just one of the things that identifies people who speak Spanish from Spain. He was able to pronounce as a local because your palate develops the ability to do that. When you learn a language at an older age, your palate doesn't necessarily do that. You end up using American sounds speaking Spanish. For example, you would say, por favor, darme la cuenta. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you learn Spanish at a younger age, you would say, por favor, señor, dame la cuenta. You sound more like a native. I am thoroughly convinced that we should start educating children in foreign languages at a much early age. You see more and more of these immersion schools spring up throughout the country, not just Spanish, but Chinese. Imagine how marketable these children are going to be when they become older. And some of the people I've met who speak Mandarin, speak English, speak another Asian language, it's incredible the job opportunities they have. A language also boosts your confidence. I've noticed that people whose language was first language and not Spanish and have been able to acquire that second language have like an air of confidence about them. They have a mastery of two languages, which means a mastery of two cultures. How incredible is that? They can go from one world to another. For me, growing up, I lived in two worlds. I lived in my world at home, and I lived in my world in school. Sometimes those worlds intermix, other times I didn't, but I was able to function in those worlds. It gives you great confidence to know a second language. And it's a necessary part of the learning process because it puts you out there. What it does is it moves you out of your comfort zone. You'll be nervous at first. You learn a language and you're afraid that you may not speak it well, but you know what? Just cut loose and learn the language because people will be kind. Put yourself out there. You can imagine the sense of accomplishment you will feel after you go through the process of learning a language and then being able to communicate. Oh my God, what a great feeling that is, isn't it? It's incredible. Learning another language will also strengthen your decision making. There are studies that show that decisions made in your second language are more reason driven than those made in your native language. It's contrary to popular belief that when we deliberate in a second or third language, we actually distance ourselves from the emotional responses and biases deeply associated with our mother tongue. That's just not true. The fact is, when you're able to reason and negotiate in another language, you're able to, at least you can concentrate more. For example, I find that when I'm in a business setting in Spanish, I end up concentrating more because I just have to. Remember, I speak Spanish, but every Spanish speaking country has a different dialect, different words. I have to be more on my toes, but yes, you end up paying more attention. The most important thing is that you gain a new perspective. As you explore language and culture, you draw a comparison to what's familiar, to what's different. You can take the best of both and eliminate the worst of most. You understand the positive and negatives. It gives you a greater appreciation for the things you have. You may decide to shake things up a little bit, but it gives you that appreciation. Gain perspective. Not everyone perhaps will agree with this. In my world, my international travels, I have found speaking another language has been incredible for the reasons I've told you. It's never too late to learn the language. I believe that if more and more people began to learn a second language or a third language, there would probably be less racism in this world. There will be the connection that puts you together, and that connection is the language. And with the language comes the culture. Teach your children a foreign language at a young age. Understand to appreciate the world. Thank you.